Hey, this is Mark Gutkowski with Bennion Deville Homes, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about lease land. When I moved to Palm Springs, like most of my clients, said I am not going to live on leased land. It's just not going to happen. And I thought I'd come here to Indian Canyons. This is one of the most popular neighborhoods here in Palm Springs to talk about why that may not be the choice for you. So the way leased land works is the land is owned by someone different than you when you buy the home. The home is considered an improvement, you purchase that, and the land is owned by someone else. Here in Palm Springs, that's typically going to be by an Indian family. The Bureau of Indian Affairs are the ones that deal with kind of working with the leases and making sure as you purchase that is taken care of. So what that means is you buy the home and then you have to pay a lease per year. And depending on how that lease is structured, it can be very reasonable. Sometimes it can be quite high. It also depends on if the owner of the home in the past had, renewed the lease. I think the best way to think about this, because people oftentimes ask, well, does this mean I could lose my home? Is to think about China and to think about Hong Kong. So that was a British colony, and at some point, they did not renew that lease and Hong Kong went back to China. Hence the fear of, should I buy on leased land in Palm Springs? Well, here it's a slightly different thing. The Indians and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they sort of have a kind of a vested interest in making sure this whole system continues to work, because I mean, you can have a beautiful home like the one behind me, and if all the different neighborhoods start questioning whether the land below them is going to go back to the Indians and therefore the home is going to go back to them, the whole system would fall apart. So what typically happens is the land is renegotiated or extended in some way. So for instance, here in Indian Canyons, the leases go through 2063, and they're actually quite reasonable. I mean, oftentimes you'll have anything from $3,000 or $4,000 a year for the land, up to, it could be $10,000 or $12,000, really depending on if somebody renewed in time or not. So I guess the way to also look at it is when you're paying for a home that is on leased land, you actually pay less for it. The home behind me, if it were on fee land, would be worth a lot more money than it is here in Indian Canyon. So you actually get the benefit of that. So although you don't own the land and you do have to maintain that cost per year, you do end up paying less for the home. Now, taxation-wise, you're still going to get taxed as if you own the land. There's a usury interest equation that the county uses, so you're not going to get taxed based on the price of the house. And here, 1.5 or 1.25% is the tax rate in the area, and that's usually based on the purchase price. But since you don't own the land, you would think, oh, well, it's just going to be based on the purchase of the home, or what they call the improvement. But the reality is that the county does an equation for that land that the home is on, and it will then sort of say, okay, we're going to charge you for the use of that land even though you don't own it. And I know that sounds a little bit wonky. Now, in a strict leased land property, the land itself is owned by one entity, probably a family or a series of families, if it's Indian leased land. There's a thing also called a sandwich lease, and so if you have land and the developer leased that land to make their development, and then when they sold the development, they sold the homes with a lease to the homeowners, then what happens is that developer is the one negotiating the lease with the original homeowner, the original landowner. So in this case, probably Indian lease. So that sandwich lease is somebody who's leasing to the homeowners that they developed the homes for, and then they're negotiating the lease with the actual landowners, and they're taking a cut, and that's called a sandwich lease. So that's like a whole nother wrinkle that you might have to deal with. Because of this leased land situation, and hopefully that doesn't sound horrible, because the truth is I live on leased land. And I moved from Seattle, and I was like, oh, there's just no way it's going to happen. I got onto it, and one of the things, actually, before I continue the other thought, one of the things to keep in mind about leased land is if you're getting a loan, you have to have technically 5 years, but 5 to 6 years more than the lease that you're going to be, or I'm sorry, than the loan you're going to be using to buy a property. So like if you're going to be buying the property behind me and you wanted to get a 30-year mortgage, there would have to be at least 35 or 36 years left on the lease to get a 30-year mortgage. If that lease gets shorter and starts getting to be, like, let's say it's a 30-year that's left, really you could only get something like a 20-year mortgage on that. And each time something of that nature happens, fewer and fewer buyers can look at the property, and it can make the property value go down. So like in the case of my property, my lease goes through 2042. You can only get a 15-year mortgage anymore. So there are fewer buyers looking at my property, and it's artificially keeping the price of my property down. Now, we're working on negotiating that, and that happens as a block. You don't do it as an individual home, you do it as a neighborhood. And when you do that, you eventually come to terms with the leaseholders. And the BIA, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, really kind of works with everybody on that because they have a vested interest in making sure this whole system works across the entire valley. Because if one neighborhood falls apart and Indians are taking back that property or that neighborhood, it would make the whole system a little bit wonky and could jeopardize really a great source of income for the Bureau of the Indian Affairs, or for the Indian families that are involved. So I know that at some point, even on my property, it's going to happen. I assume it is. I can't say I know, but I assume it is. And when that does happen, then my property value will go up because it'll be extended probably 25 years, and I'll pay some amount of money to the leaseholder in order to extend my lease, and also my monthly payments will probably go up. But as all of that happens, I also am now I now have buyers who can buy with a 30-year mortgage, and the more people who can do that, the more buyers I have, and the value of my property goes up. So it's all sort of an interesting kind of interplay between all those different elements that's going on. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, I kind of touched on this, they really do have a vested interest in making sure that all of this works, because all the families that are involved, all the Indian families, it's not just like one monolithic owner. It's individual families who own the different properties. The Bureau sort of helps that whole process continue going forward, because at no point that I can tell do they want it to fall apart, because they're getting a lot of money from that process. So that's kind of the quick 411 on leased land. It's not terribly scary. I will say that if you are getting a loan on leased land, you do really need to work with a local broker, and I do have loan brokers that I work with and I trust. Just contact me. My email address, or I'm sorry, my web address is markgps.com. And it's sort of like if you're buying a co-op on the East Coast or even in Washington State, you have to use a specific bank because there's a specific way that's done. Same thing is true with lease land. If you're using a big box bank, your broker will say, oh yeah, this will work just fine. And it will if it's on fee land, but on lease land, it's simply going to fall apart at the last moment and you're going to end up without a home. You really need to use a local broker for that, or a loan broker. So if you have any questions about lease land, please feel free to reach out. Again, it's markgps.com for my website, and I'd be happy to help you with your real estate questions and help you with real estate. I help buyers, I help sellers. Please feel free to come to my site and see how that all works, and please come and help us enjoy the sunshine. By the way, it is October 9th while I'm doing this, and it's going to be 100 degrees today. So if you are looking at the end of your summer, perhaps you might want to consider extending it. All right, take care.